I'm not entirely sure, but I think as far as feeding was sort of nice, there was also the rodents, I think, and there was somebody doing the washing, I think. I'm not sure if it was Diana Snow or, yeah, I think Diana Snow might have done that. It was Diana Adams, I'm not sure.
Diana, yeah. Well, Diana will be there, so she can type up. Just don't want to leave anyone out who was part of it.
No.
So, off we go.
Well, before we start, I mean,
it's a beautiful spot here. Overlooking the ocean. This is why we put the grave here, is because of this marvellous view. And we had to get special permission from council. We got a couple of the councillors actually came up here with us, and I think there was Bernard and myself, and the two councillors, and we brought them here, and they said, yes, you can have this grave as long as there is no others. And we said, no, there won't be any more. This is it. This is the last one. This is a very special person to us. This is the person who bought this property. He was a disciple of Mayor Barber. So they gave us permission, which we were ecstatic, because normally they won't do that. And so then we built the grave here, and this is where Francis was laid to rest in 1984. The most beautiful day. It must have been 150 people, I suppose. Just lovely. Were you there, Felix?
Yeah.
Lovely. And no, you remember certain things in your life, and that was one of them. It's one of the things I remember. And then this year, which is the 100th anniversary of Francis's birth, we came here again, I suppose about 50, 60 people, and we sat around here, and poems were read, and we sang songs, and again, a lovely atmosphere, just really special, worthy of Francis. It was lovely. But I remember him telling some beautiful Barber stories, and it was enriching. Like, I mean, my time, which I'll talk about shortly, with Francis and the working bees, was that we'd have these breaks, and then lunch, of course, and then he'd tell us these most wonderful, heartwarming stories about Barber and just uplifting stories. And it was like, I mean, you know, for all that hard yakka, like it felt like nothing. It was just such a privilege to be present, you know.
Roy and Felix, thank you for being here and allowing this interview.
Our pleasure.
We've got a couple of questions we've been asking everybody, the same questions. The first one that I like to ask is the first meeting with Francis. So I always find that the first meetings are always that little bit special.
Yep.
Just briefly, your first meeting with Francis.
All right, ready to go? My first meeting with Francis was in 1969. A group of Australians went to the Great Darshan, and it was May that year. Anyhow, we arrived late at night. I guess the plane got in at 12 o'clock. I think it was about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. We came down, we checked into our rooms, we came downstairs to meet Francis. And I was quite taken back and surprised. In my mind, I had this image of this shining knight who was about 10 foot tall. And he was this little wizened man with a fag hanging out the corner of his mouth. But he was just lovely. Like he won us over. And what happened then? He sort of took the Australian group like he was the mother hen, we're his chickens. He took us round. He introduced us to all the monthly. He looked after us. He cared about our health. So that was my first introduction to Francis, and just this very, very loving being. What a privilege.
I was there at the same time, but I remember very little. I was at diarrhea, terrible diarrhea. I was sick in India virtually from the third day onwards.
Really?
But when I really met Francis, sort of on a face-to-face basis, was when I came here in 1970, before I left for Switzerland. I went back to Switzerland for 4 years. And before that I came here and was about a week here, and I remember staying in a bunkhouse. Francis lived in the curtained off section at the end of Barber's house, and we had quite a few days together, and we visited the Bruffords, the Rouses, the Shipways together, and I happened to be here when for the first time he sang Blacksmith to John Brufford when he had his birthday, and just a really fantastic time. Yes, just being here and being virtual. I think Jim Miskis was here as well, but it was just really a very intimate time, and it was just fantastic. And when I then left for Switzerland, he said, well, we corresponded a bit, not much, but I got a few letters, and eventually I was drawn back to be with Francis and some of the Barber friends I'd made in Australia.
You both had a long association with Francis, and I know you both were living here around Avatar's abode, so you very much had a lot of interaction with Francis over many years. What stands out in your memory most, above everything else, about Francis?
Francis, we used to come and work with Francis on a Wednesday, and we were chopping down groundsel, lantana. There was great thunderous bushes of it all over the place, and he taught me the discipline of correct, efficient working, rather than madly attacking a bush you want to knock down. Well-placed cuts, well-placed cuts with an axe. Point of vision. He taught me to be present, to be concentrated on what you're doing, not scattered. But then the most important things for me were when we would take a break. And we'd have a break, as Felix said, after a few hours, mid-morning, and then lunchtime. And these wonderful stories he'd tell us, like they're just so full and so rich. You know, we'd get out there and we'd really worked hard, but it just seemed like nothing for the privilege of coming and being with him. It was just lovely.
Yeah, what I remember most about Francis, to me he was a mentor. I mean, he was there, and not so much through verbal communication. I can't remember words, but I remember his actions. I remember what he liked and what he disliked. And for instance, he disliked wasting food, wasting this and that. And that sort of, to me, always sticks in my memory. Sort of the things he did, and yeah, just being around him, hanging around, basically. And yeah. Like Roy said, I learned how to hold a shovel.
And make a cup of tea. Good cup of tea.
Nearly every single person I've interviewed has mentioned Francis and his cup of tea.
Had to be hot.
That's right. Even in the middle of summer.
Even in the middle of summer.
That's it. Yeah.
What did he teach you? I know, Felix, from talking to people, they've mentioned you quite a bit, that you'd had, you're quite close. You were single. You're one of the single people, so you actually got a lot of time with him.
Yes.
What did he teach you most in your life that sort of stayed with you?
Oh, this is a very difficult question. It's in a way a bit more like when Barbara was asked, when somebody asked that question to Erich, basically, it's more what you lose than what you actually gain. I find you sort of probably lose a bit of your ego, who knows, but I can't sort of say I've learned anything in a very strange way, if you know what I mean. Yeah, it's probably more what you lose. You sort of lose your sense of self-importance and things like that.
Is there a story that you remember that kind of demonstrates that?
None in particular, no.
I've also asked people about the Francis legacy that lives on in the Australian Barber community today. Would you agree? How would you describe his legacy lives on?
It lives on in the art. The form of art would be number one before all people, which just goes on continually. He's like beautiful words. Like, what can you say? They touch the heart. his values, like me, I'd like to answer that question of what did he do, what did I get from it. He taught me discipline. He taught me that spirituality was very practical. No crap, don't get into all the flowery kowtowing and all the rest of it. It's a very practical doing affair. It's love and action. And he led by example. It wasn't like you get there and say, this is what you've got to do. It wasn't like that. But this is beautiful man, and this was his values, and you had to pick it up, and go with it. And practical spirituality, a little story. We used to have these meetings which would rotate Rouse's, Shipways, our place up on the range, I think Lee and Steve Campbell's, different places. And at one stage, the numbers started, people would shift to the cities, and so they dwindled a bit. And Francis said, finish, no point. Do you know what I mean? Sort of, you don't just hold something for the sake of it. There's not the full interest. Okay, we'll do something else. Something else was done. And it was very practical.
So would you say that pragmatism lives on in the Australian barber community?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think so, definitely. And there's a whole theme of being non-sentimental. Do you know what I mean? Sort of, Francis has really pushed that, and sometimes we might even go too far, But that's it's there. No, he's left a huge footprint on this property, and Australia, and the world one day, I think.
Is there anything you would like to share?
Yes, I feel his poetry will live on very much, because even to this day, quite often some of his guzzles comes to my mind. It's very strange, even after so many years. I mean, I sort of keep hum one of the melodies that Sam wrote with his guzzles. Like, especially important to me is that do not give up. I mean, that sort of pops into my mind when I'm in trouble, when I'm emotionally upset, and it really helps me. And there's other guzzles like that just have tremendous force. And I think that will live on, probably even more so in the future.
Another question I've been asking is, if you were to paint a picture, or if you were to take a photograph, if you were to write a little fictional story about Francis, how would you actually visually describe him?
A craggy little ball of love.
I can't say. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm totally inartistic, so I'm lost for words.
Do you have any story, Felix, that you can share? Just something that sort of you remember, a little story of being with Francis?
Yes. One thing I found with Francis, he always sort of seemed to bring Barber close to me or to us, those people around him. He never really got himself in the way, and in a way, as I think I mentioned before, his likes and dislikes sort of seemed to originate from his training period in India. And one story, I mean, in some ways it was almost like being with Barber. Did I just mention that about the one? No, I didn't. At once, very, very occasionally, we were allowed to have a bit of wine when we were having dinner with Francis in Barber's house, but that was only for special occasions. And I remember that one time we had one bottle amongst probably about 10 or 12 people, about that much of wine, and I mean, it was nothing. I mean, but even so, I mean, on this particular occasion, somebody knocked at the door, and Francis made sure that the bottle was sort of well hidden away, like Barber did on one occasion when playing cards, and a particular person visited Barber, so they put the cards, everybody sat on their cards, and then the person got in. So that was very similar, and in many ways Francis was like that. It had that feeling like of being with Barber there, and that was one of the tremendous feelings of being with Francis.
And that reminds me of a story. And on the day before he died, we do shifts. We were looking after him, and I think I relieved Patricia. But when I went into Francis, and he was in the end room of his cottage, this room, the feeling of love there was just overwhelming. He was cognizant. He was, because he'd thought he was suffering from dementia. He was present. He was back. And it's just like, I felt like I'm standing in Barbara's living presence, and it was just like one of those things you never forget. And he died the next morning, early.
And he actually died just as Roy and Ross were pulling up in that car, right that moment.
Yeah.
Right that moment.
Yeah.
Mm.
Felix, were you with him when he died?
I was, yes. I had the duty of being there during the night. I slept in Francis's cabin for the last year or so of his life, and my duty was, because he was bedridden and he couldn't turn, so he would get bed sores. To prevent that, I had to turn him once during the night, probably about 2 or 3 in the morning, and I used to feed him breakfast in the morning. So that was my job. And then I left for work for the day.
Felix was the major carer.
Well, not really. No, I don't feel like that at all. I mean,
we do.
I did those 2 things. I mean, it's no big deal. I mean,
no, I'm not trying to make a big deal. It's just to me factual. You were there at night time, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
And we all took shifts during the day, and that was a magnificent job, Felix.
Who was there with you, Felix, or were you alone?
I was there by myself, yes.
Can you describe the last moments?
The last moment, it started off, I can't remember times exactly, but it started off early in the morning. It was soon after daybreak, I think, and Francis's breathing changed pace. It sort of just was different than to what it normally was. And after a few minutes, I went down to Patricia's place and knocked on her door and told her about it. And she came up, and then she also said, "Oh, we should call Roy and Ross." So we had a phone line to prove it. So I called up Bernard, and Bernard relayed a message to Roy and Ross. Bernard came over. So as Francis was lying on the side, I basically just touched him, and I was repeating Barbara's name, and I think Bernard was doing the same thing. And then it just went on like that for a while, and then as Roy and Ross pulled up in their car outside, Francis stopped breathing.
So Bernard was there with you?
Yes, and Patricia.
He didn't say anything?
No, he didn't.
He wasn't really conscious?
I can't really say, but Francis in his last month spoke very little. In fact, he hadn't talked to me for months. I don't know why. Maybe whether he wasn't able. I think he spoke a little to you and Ross on occasions, but he didn't talk to me. Except I remember one occasion there was a sort of a sheet tied to the bed, so he couldn't fall out of bed if he did move. And on one occasion he sort of said, "Don't be so uptight." I don't know whether he meant whether I was uptight or whether he meant that it was too tight. Or what, I don't know.